Yeah. So we don't sound like a mutual admiration society here. What's the solution then? If you guys are both convinced that the Americans have created their own problem and now it's flowing onto the rest of us, including Australia, Steve, what should they be doing?
Well, I think the solution, the world needs to recognize that America is not the engine of the global economy. We're the caboose. Anybody can consume. Little children can consume. The key is to produce. The key is to save, not to borrow. And if America stops consuming and stops borrowing, that's not going to hurt the global economy. That's going to help the global economy. The rest of the world has been living beneath their means so that we can live beyond ours. So I think for the world, the solution is to write off the U.S.
I wish Peter were right that the rest of the world had its act in order. The rest of the OECD doesn't. It isn't just America that's been borrowing more money than it's been earning. The whole of the OECD, bar one country, which is France, has been having an increasing ratio of its debt to GDP for the last 30 years. So we're all in the borrowing game. We've all made the mistake of confusing money generated by real production with money you can borrow from a bank. And that's kept on going for so long that it's reached the point now where that game is over. If you like, it's the old greater fool philosophy. You make money if you can find a greater fool who borrows more money than you did to buy the same asset off you, and you get away rich and they end up with even more debt.
But what do we do, Peter? If you were running either the Fed in America or the Treasury, if you had all the power that comes with the stroke of a pen or hitting a computer key, what would you do right now to make sure this situation didn't get a lot worse before it gets better?
No, there's nothing I can do. It's got to get worse before it gets better. Unfortunately for America, the only way to cure these imbalances is to suffer a severe recession. There's no way around it. All the government is doing is trying to make the situation worse in the long run by postponing it. We need to stop all this reckless consumption. We need to have much higher interest rates in the United States, and we need to allow companies to go bankrupt. We need to allow real estate prices to collapse. We need to rebalance our economy. That can't be done without a lot of pain. But, you know, the rest of the world, somebody is saving, somebody is loaning us this money, and there are a lot of consumer goods all around America. There are factories somewhere in the world that are producing this stuff. That's real wealth, and the world has that. We don't.
Meanwhile, the upshot of all of this, of course, is people, whether it's in Australia, with the flow on to this country, or in America, where people are losing their homes, losing their life savings, losing everything that matters to them, the whole core of their existence. It's a very human problem in the long run. We're talking high finance
But they never had any life savings. It was an illusion to begin with. And they're not losing places to live. The one problem we don't have in America is housing. We got so many houses that are empty. Nobody's on the street. You know, they're losing the fantasy of home equity. But, you know, so you move out of one house and you rent another one. But nobody is going homeless.
Peter mentioned the Americans should actually, in fact, raise interest rates. We've just had a lowering of interest rates in this country. Are we heading in the wrong direction?
No. The whole belief that you can manipulate the economy using interest rates has been fallacious. It's been focusing on the rate of inflation and believing there's a simple inverse relationship between the rate of inflation and the rate of interest that means you can fine-tune the economy, totally ignoring in the background the explosion in private debt. That's the thing that both Peter and I are focusing on. So
lower interest rates or not, are people going to lose their homes in this country?
Yes. The scale of debt is so enormous that there isn't the physical production to back it. It's even worse in Australia than in America with the deindustrialisation of our society in the last 2 decades.
Are we talking here, Peter, of people's expectations just being too high altogether because of the ready access to loan monies? People think they can afford to live in ways that they can't live.
Well, people think the government has real wealth and the government can help solve problems. They can't. All they have is a printing press. They can debase money. They can rearrange the losses, but they can't make them go away, and they can't produce anything. And the problem on interest rates is we shouldn't have government setting interest rates. Just like we don't have government setting the price of anything. They're going to do it wrong. And of course, when it comes to inflation, our government lies about inflation. They claim our inflation is non-existent. In the GDP deflator, where they tried to manufacture 3% growth, the government claimed inflation in America is running at a 1.2% annual rate, the lowest in 10 years. Our inflation rate is over 10% a year. The government cooks the books. If the free market set interest rates, they would be much higher, because nobody would loan money for below the rate of inflation.
Yeah, well, at least in this country we can say that the government are not lying about inflation. They're actually blaming it for all the problems that we have. But are they missing the point as well when they keep harping on the way they do about inflation, when in fact we don't hear much mention of this enormous private and public debt?
The central banks of the world, including our Reserve Bank and certainly the American FRB, they've forgotten the reason they were created to some extent was to prevent an occurrence like the Great Depression. They've ignored debt completely. and in the meantime focused on inflation, debt has gone through the roof. We've got back to twice as much debt as we had before the Great Depression began. And inflation, which is low, they're trying to drive it lower. That's the second half of the recipe for a debt deflation.
We're running out of time, unfortunately, gentlemen. But Peter, if I can put this to you in conclusion, would you like to be either John McCain or Barack Obama inheriting this situation as President of the United States of America in a few months' time?
Well, look, I would like to have the job, but neither one of them is up to it. They're going to walk into a landmine, and then they're going to step on every one. It's going to be a complete disaster, whoever's president. And our country is in serious, serious trouble. Other countries have smaller problems, but nothing like the United States. It is a real mess. And all I can say is anybody who's watching this in Australia, if you've got any money invested in any U.S. dollar-denominated equities or debt, just sell the first chance you get.
Peter, thanks very much for talking to us. I know we could go on all day or all night, depending on what part of the world you're in. But thank you very much for talking with us.
Sure thing.
And Professor Steve Hing, thanks to you.
Thank you, George.
Don't reach for the rusty razor blade. Clearly, if you believe those two guys, the so-called free market can be extremely expensive. Coming up, climate change threatens the bread bowl of Egypt.